We are now live streaming, and I'm declaring the meeting of this first Zoom meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee on the 14th of May open. Apologies for the slight delay, but we had some technical issues and others here that you'll hear about shortly. Now we have a public forum. We have 4 people in the public forum. Because the agenda is fairly full, and because we have obviously time issues with the Zoom platform, I will be asking people to contain themselves in the question time. Speakers in the public forum will have 5 minutes, as you know, and there'll be up to 5 minutes for questions, and they will only be questions, please, and I'd appreciate your help with that. The first person speaking in the public forum is Mr. Weatherall. Do we have Mr. Weatherall somewhere, please?
We're right. We're just looking at this.
Where?
He's actually
Yeah. Can you hear us, David?
I can. We know audio. You're not coming in on picture, Brent?
Now.
Oh, here
we are.
Yep,
We have you both. I recognise those 2 gorgeously handsome faces. I can confirm, just before we start your 5 minutes, I can confirm I have your documents. They have been received. Thank you. All right.
John is going to start today. Thank you.
5 minutes and then questions if you wish.
Look, David, thank you very much. And we're reversing what we did last week, as I'm going to start. And we are aware of the time constraint that neither speech is very long, so we'd appreciate if you just give us some little leeway. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to the presentation of this petition to your committee. At the annual plan hearing of last week, Mr. Weatherall and myself expressed our deep concern that a decision had been made by council to make significant and, in our view, negative changes to the traffic flow in George Street, from 2-way traffic to 1-way traffic. The Mayor, Mr. Hawkins, began the meeting by saying, and I quote, "I can assure you no decision has been made." Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Hawkins, I simply do not believe you. And I quote from the Otago Times, June the 12th. "A plan to significantly transform much of Dunedin's Main Street has been approved by the City Council. The Dunedin City Council voted to endorse the preliminary design for a multi-million-dollar upgrade of George Street. That plan is still on the council records and indeed has already been given over to a consortium of Christchurch companies who are working through the preliminary design. So much for your assurance, Mr. Hawkins. That is a decision. I'm pleased to be able to support Mr. Weatherall in the presentation of this petition, which clearly shows the depth of indignation that the citizens of Dunedin feel towards this proposed major change to their main shopping precinct. At the meeting of last week, Councillor Vincent Pope, yourself, sir, asked the question, should we not listen to the experts? Well, I can assure the councillor we are listening to the experts, and there's over 6,000 of them. In conclusion, I appeal to this committee today, stop making decisions on George Street. Have the courage to come out from behind the experts and consult with the retailers, consult with the Landlords Association, consult with the Otago Chamber of Commerce and other stakeholders. Who knows? You may get support for your views. Thank you.
Thank
you, John. Brent.
Good afternoon, councillors. Thank you for today's opportunity to present to you the petition to keep 2-way traffic with ample parking on George Street, initiated out of frustration by Dunedin retailers. I must say on behalf of Dunedin business, we are very humbled to present over 6,300 signatures to council today, with more to come. Not only did the public sign, but in doing so, gave many reasons for doing so. This is their day, and I wish to share with council some of their opinions directly to you. Number 1, council is more than happy to police and gain a very good revenue from parking in Dunedin. However, it denies it has a responsibility to provide more parking to replace the hundreds of parks removed by council over the last 5 years. 2, reducing or removing traffic out of any central business district should only come about out of necessity, Given the present roading structure designed around the geographical nature of land Dunedin CBD sits on and the population of Dunedin, the necessity is not there for any change. 3. Council should concentrate with infrastructure on the outskirts of the CBD and work their way into the centre of town. Council has got it completely wrong, wanting to work from the inside out. 4. I choose to live in Dunedin for what it is, not for what council wants to make it. 5. The fantasy of a bustling Main Street mall conveniently utilised by thousands of people and bird life in a lovely climate is just a dream. Council needs to wake up fast to the agenda of hopefully the minority of council and listen to the majority of those you represent. 6.
Well done. Thank you very much. Well, you had 30 seconds to spare. Are you happy to take questions?
I'm afraid, Mr. Benson-Pope, I really do have a question, and I've got just a couple more, and I think it's fairly reasonable. I don't want to overrun too far. I will do my very best to catch up.
You've got 30 seconds. Carry on.
Respect the elderly. We are all hopefully getting a shot at old age. It's disrespectful of council not to take into account the mobility and access issues of our ageing population. I have a question today for councillors requiring clarification to the signatories of today's petition. Has there ever been any cost analysis completed on an upgrade plan of George Street in its present two-way traffic form? One that includes the replacement of underground surfaces with the retention of existing lighting, curb and channeling, and improved footpath and road surfaces, which the Central Dunedin Business Group believes would save the council millions of dollars for the rate-paying citizens of Dunedin.
Thank you, Brent. I've given you an extra 30 seconds. Now, I'll ask the first question if you're happy with questions. Are you?
Yes.
Your petition, when you introduced it, you talked about it being about two-way traffic and parking. I've just looked at the form. There's no mention of parking. So that's just a later addition on your part, is it?
No, it is not. It's on the top of the top of the advertised form. I have a letter about it that's been on the parking side of it. Basically goes hand in hand.
Well,
and when
all I'm saying for the clarity of councillors and others is that the forms I have in front of me say keep two-way traffic on George Street Dunedin. There's no mention of anything else. So let's just leave it at that. Further questions?
Right, but in answering that, no, I won't leave it at that. I'm sorry. The answer to that is I should be able to answer you. In the advertised ODT, 3 full-page advertisements publicising the fact had free ample parking to provide more ample parking in it. I can hold up a copy of it to you if you give me a minute. I've got a copy of it. The ODT could easily provide you with that also. So
I'm sorry, Mr. Weatherall, you referred to the petition. I've just looked at the petition. That's what's on it. So let's move on, shall we? Questions, councillors? I have a question from Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. I was just listening to what you said, John and Brent, and I'm just wondering what the key stakeholders, who are the retailers and others, think about how we should do this process of upgrading the street, the CBD. What do you think this process should be?
Well, I thought I outlined that quite clearly at the hearings committee meeting last week. There's got to be consultation. The council seems to me to be firing ahead, making decisions that will be difficult to overturn. You've already made one major decision, which is to give over to a consultant their plan to one-way traffic in George Street. That's a major decision, and with no consultation whatsoever. So it seems to me that the council is going to make decisions, then come back and then at that stage consult. But by then, the plan has already been made. The decision to be made by councillors. We, as people who are concerned, has not had the opportunity of sitting down with councillors and others and persuading them that our view is the right way to go. The only chance
Point of
we've
order,
got
Mr. Chairman.
is what? 5 minutes, you know. to
Point of order.
persuade
Sorry,
council.
just a point of order.
Yeah, Mr. Bezet is making assertions around the process that led to the decisions council have made around the Central City Plan, saying that there was no consultation. And while individual members of the community can have a view on how rigorous or how thorough that consultation was, there was indeed direct consultation around the George Street work, which fed into the decisions that council have made at a high level around the retail quarter.
From your point of view, though,
Excuse me. Let me respond to that point of order, please. I think it's a fair point, and I'd ask you to actually stick to the facts. You know, as well as we all do, there was extensive public consultation, and it's a matter of public record, and I'm sure the reports are available to you if you want them.
the public record is that Heart of Dunedin opposed the one-way traffic flow quite clearly, and that involves the majority of property owners down and along George Street, and their wishes have not been respected by council at all.
Well, there's a difference, Mr. Weatherall, as you probably appreciate, between consultation and getting your own way. Are there any further questions from councillors? Councillor Lord.
It's called common sense.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, sorry about that. Couldn't find the mute button. Brent, I just want to ask a question. You say you speak for Heart of Dunedin. Do you think that your views are representative of most of the George Street retailers in particular?
Yes.
And you'd be quite confident about that?
Absolutely, but council are more than happy to do their own research into that. I've spent a lot of time doing it and knocking on a lot of doors. We've advertised, there's over 40 people that held that petition for their customers to sign. 40 along George Street and in and around the CBD.
And further to that, Councillor Lord, you should have that information yourself because you've already done trials. For example, the Octagon trial. Have you got the feedback from that as to whether it was successful or not? And the George Street trial of last year, have you got the results from that as to whether it was successful? We've only heard from the Councillor Hawkins, as he was at that time, saying it was successful. Well, we have heard quite the opposite by many people, that it was an absolute waste of money. $140,000 for a wasted survey. So you should have the information yourself, Councillor Lord.
Thank you. Next question is from Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. So, Mr. Weatherall, Mr. Bezet, where should we go to next? What do you believe the council process should be next?
Well, in my view, there's definitely been a strong public backlash. Over 6,300 so-called experts in Dunedin want it retained. And I think these people deserve to be listened to. This is the petition day. This is their day. And power to the people. They have spoken loud and clear. And I think it has to go back to the table and nut this out, most definitely.
Thank you.
It's all about respect.
Councillor Vandervis.
I thought that I'd given you a clear lead for that, Councillor Wiley, with my appeal to the committee today. Stop making decisions on George Street. Consult before you do so.
Councillor Vandervis, please.
Brent and John, you have been told at a previous meeting that there's going to be no work taking place in George Street until April next year. Do you consider that planning and design work on George Street is actually work? Or do you consider that the planning and design work that currently is going on is not work?
I consider it most definitely is work. And the word a proposed plan, which Mr. Hawkins and Councillor Benston Pope have actually repeatedly alluded to, is actually a load of rubbish. I feel that Dunedin residents ask councillors to individually stand, just like businesses and property owners have in Dunedin, and show courage to clearly tell the public of Dunedin who of you are in favour of either one-way or two-way traffic flow. You all have opinions. The public of Dunedin wants to know what side of the fence you sit on this moment.
Well, I don't think too many people are sitting on the fence, Mr. Weatherall. There are no further questions. Thank you very much for your time. Can we go to the Chamber of Commerce, please? Where have they gone? You there somewhere, Dougal? Ah. Can you hear me, Mr. McGowan?
Hello?
Malcolm? Dougal? Can you hear me? You should be able to hear us. You're not on mute. Can you wave if you can hear me?
Can't hear or...
I can hear you now. What's the problem, do you think? I think it's at his end. Is his volume turned up?
Is that better for you? Can you hear?
I can hear you. Can you not hear me still? Why?
The secretary's ringing him at the moment.
Sorry?
The secretary's ringing him at the moment.
We can hear him, but he can't hear us. His volume must be down.
Right.
On his device.
Unfortunately, his phone goes straight to.
Can you hear?
His phone goes.
We're in.
But can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, I can now. We've unplugged everything.
Perfect. Perfect. We've only wasted a minute and a half. We won't penalise you for that. Thank you very much. Dougal, thanks for being here. I'd appreciate you making any comments you want to in terms of acting as a sort of a clearinghouse. I understand it for the feedback for the request that went out as a result of what council asked. So the 5 minutes are yours.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for allowing us to be here today again. And it's great to be able to have a voice on behalf of business, so we do appreciate that. I suppose just to start off, a couple of questions that I would have, and they're rhetorical questions that I suppose councillors would need to answer themselves, is in this process and how this has come together, we know that there have been some short timeframes, but the key part there is how adequately informed do you feel you have been to be able to make an informed decision about what is going to be best. And secondly, the timing of this and how we can get the information to people and how we got information from people will be quite important as well. I suppose it goes back to the starting point as well, as what supported the decision and what was part of the decision making of the paper, which I'm not privy to. But when I read the executive summary, it talks about shopping areas. Now, areas would mean plural to me, but I only see that we're looking at George Street only, or that area around George Street and Princess Street, and we don't seem to have any application there around South Dunedin, Green Island, other aspects. So this has been particularly targeted at George Street. And I suppose the other part there is, what is the issue we're trying to fix? And is it actually an issue before we get started? So why do I ask that? Well, we're asking the question as we want to create safe spaces for people to become pedestrians up and down the main street. But yet at the same time, on those same footpaths, we're going to be putting the ability for shops to trade onto those same footpaths. So by doing that, you're actually reducing the space on that footpath by allowing trading on it. So you're actually condensing that space. Do we actually know whether the shops actually want to use the footpaths for their trading, and the fact that how are they going to actually be able to be inside their shop and outside to make sure that their stock is being adequately cared for and looked after during these times? So my question for that part would be, have we actually talked to the businesses about how many of them would actually want to go onto the footpath? Because that may not be an issue at all, and therefore it creates more space for pedestrians to walk up and down. So that would be something that I think people should need to understand before making those decisions. Really fully support a move towards free parking, free monitored parking for a period of time to support people being into the city, but making sure that there is a turnover of that parking and that is monitored and looked after in that way. I think it's really important that we understand some of the data. It's been very limited, obviously, and we get both extremes. I have received both extremes of the data that we've done together with Enterprise Dunedin. So I've got a copy of that. I understand that. However, what I have received via email and probably via phone is probably a bit more vitriolic, probably against any of the changes that have been there, that have been proposed. And the other issue that I would say is the 10 kilometres now. What has driven that? I mean, it's a 30-kilometre zone now, and very seldom would I actually see cars travelling at that speed. So do we actually know what speed car actually travelling? And that is an issue that needs to be fixed. So there's a whole lot of questions that I have in there around that. Equally, I noticed that within the paper, there is conversations about potentially accessing other funds. And what does that mean if we do access other funds, and what are our commitments to those long term? Equally, I see in the paper that that people are talking about creating activation events. My caution on that would be making sure that they are activation events that does not require people to congregate in large numbers in small places or places where they're going to be within a small period of time. So I would just keep that in the back of our minds as part of our activation strategies that people have there. And I'm just going through my last of my bits here. Yes. So overall, the surveys are saying neither really for or against. The voices I've heard via phone and email are very strongly against from members and retailers. And we probably have seen that by some coming out in certain aspects of the media as well. But happy to take questions.
Thanks, Dougal. I'll start just in terms of the issue you raised about what the results of the survey and the feedback says. Councillors have already received by email from the Chief Executive that quick analysis, which we can discuss if and when we get to this agenda item later on. So I'm not going to invite Sue to respond to that now, because I'd like councillors to have the opportunity to ask their questions, and we do need to keep to time. And the first question is Councillor Walker.
I would say. Hi, Dougal. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, Steve.
Hey, Dougal. I guess I've got to answer a question with a question. So I guess the question is, would you agree, in terms of your points around consultation, would you agree that the consultation has been as best as it could have been given the extraordinary circumstances under which we've been forced to work? I mean, both time constraints and, of course, the constraints of COVID-19.
Listen, we all know they're considerably difficult times, and there's been some time frames that obviously that people have to work within. I think that there are some questions that may not have been asked. So have we asked the shopkeepers whether they want to use the footpaths? I don't know whether you have or not. I think that there is still the opportunity to be able to go out and get some of that voice to be better adequately informed, because I think it's a really big decision at a time when there's so much uncertainty already for those people in those areas where they're looking at the moment really strongly trying to reactivate their current customers. And I think that it has probably been not adequate that they are informed enough about what could have been happening or what is proposed.
Cool. So very brief supplementary question. I guess then, would you agree that gives us the opportunity, obviously, to just ascertain what the pros and cons are and address those as they arise?
Look, I mean, it's always going to be difficult. So is the social distancing of 1 metre, is that a major issue? And what is our community spread of the virus? Now, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not going to pronounce me. There's enough of those all around the country at the moment already. By whenever we create a solution for something, we also create a risk or a problem elsewhere. And I don't see some of the analysis of what some of that other risk may be when we make some other changes.
I think we're still talking about 2 metres, aren't we, Mr. McGowan? But anyway, Councillor Barker.
Within a shop, they're actually allowed to be 1 metre apart within a retail store.
Thank you.
But in the street, it's 2 metres in the street with strangers.
Councillor Barker.
Kia ora, Dougal. Given that the motive behind these measures is to actually help bring business back to the CBD, what do you think are some things that council could do?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So definitely, as pointed out, I think that creating the free monitored parking is a great first step to be able to allow people to get in and out. We know, for example, that for many, they haven't been able to go to a bank for a long period of time. They haven't been able to go to a pharmacy for a long period of time. They are short turnaround, stop-off shops, drops, and things like that. So you're getting that turnover in those spaces, and we know that. We know that that's going to be an immediate need for people. I think how we can create marketing campaigns to try to get people back, and also helping those shops be able to connect with the people that they may have lost in those ways. I think it ties in with some of the bigger picture stuff, and it's hard when it's such a short-term, I suppose, health issue that if that's what we're trying to address, is the fact is, how are we going to get all of those people there safely in and out? And that's a factor that we're going to have to take into account.
Thank you. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. McGowan. I just want to ask, it's a similar question to Councillor Barker, but a little different. And I was interested that those who are strongly against supporting the proposed measures to support physical distancing, because I see it as all about that in order to reassure people and to get them back into the central business district. What options did they suggest to achieve physical distancing on the footpath? It's not in the store we're talking about, but it's on the footpath on their way to the shop, because no matter where they park, they're going to have to walk a distance. And it's that reassurance about physical distancing. So I haven't seen anything in the feedback that gives any other options apart from what we've proposed.
I suppose that goes back to that first question, or one of those first questions I have. By putting extra shop, the ability to put stuff out on the street, we're actually reducing that footpath space. Is there a way we could mark up space like different, like they have in some areas around the world, where you have arrows on different sides of the footpath that says you're walking this way or that way, and then you have a wee space in between? We've seen that in the supermarkets, we've seen that at airports now, and that's where people are directed to walk. Admittedly, it's going to be hard when it's a great big long conga line, when we get 2,000 people walking up and down the main street. How do we keep them 2 metres apart there? Yeah, we've got to make sure that people, we've got to trust the people to say, actually, we're reasonable adults here and we understand the rules, and we're going to try to stick to them ourselves as well, rather than us imposing all of them on them.
Thank you. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Do you, Dougal, do you think we have enough information as a council to make this decision today?
So that's for you as councillors to decide. I suppose my role here is to represent business, not to have Dougal McGowan's opinion, which is quite clear, but I suppose that's the challenge I'm asking each and every one of you. Do you feel you have enough information to be able to make that decision, so that you can meet those outcomes that you are in the executive summary?
As obviously the chamber represents a lot of businesses, excuse me, what do you feel that you got enough time to be prepared with this information and to engage?
So to be quite clear, and I have said this before, which is good, where I and my president had a conversation with both the mayor and Sue earlier on about, as part of a regular meeting that we have, but the paper we got on Monday, so we had talked about some things, but the paper we got on Monday, everybody's working in extreme conditions at the moment. I would say that there's probably things that with time constraints could have been done, without the time constraints could have been done better, yes. What fears do you have for business if this goes ahead? Look, they're facing big enough challenges now and in the next 6 months. Just because they're able to open the doors doesn't mean they're going to be profitable. That's for sure. So they've still got a lag period in there. They're pretty uncertain. There's a lot of stress already, and I think that if we can't activate people to get back into that area, if we can't activate them quickly by making it easy to get in there, then we're going to struggle overall, because it is winter as well. And usually during this time, they've had their period of, that March and February time where they've been able to put some money away for their slight hibernation that some of them go through. And of course, we don't have those big events that are going to be happening midwinter like we usually do around a test match or things like that. So that's going to have a great impact on them as well.
Do you have concerns that this, oh, sorry, I just have one more question.
No, sorry, sorry, Councillor. You've had 3 questions. The consequence of that is that we're way over time and other people are missing out on these questions. So we'll leave that there.
I haven't had 5 minutes and I'm entitled to it. So I had a question to ask.
Councillor, 5 minutes was for everyone, not for you alone. We have 3 more public forum presentations, so I'll please ask you to be cooperative. I need also to move a procedural motion. We're just over the half hour, and I'll move that we extend the time for the public forum, seconded by Councillor Lord. Any discussion? Those in favour, please say aye, raise their hand. Against, no. That's overwhelmingly supported. Thank you, Dougal, for your assistance and cooperation, and I'm sure that's going to be ongoing. Now, can we go to Malcolm Budd from the AA, please, who is joining us.
Bye.
Are you there, Malcolm? Hello, Malcolm.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. We've got a picture, or you're just coming in on audio?
Okay, just on audio, is it? Yeah.
That's fine. Thanks for contacting us, and thanks for your comments in advance, or for your comments. The next 5 minutes are yours, and then questions if you're happy with that.
Yep, no problem at all. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to express our views on this project. I'm chairman of the Automobile Association Otago, and the Automobile Association Otago represents 45,000 members in and around the Dunedin region. We're not against George Street redevelopment. We just want to get a fair deal for everybody concerned, but it's a huge step which will have a massive impact on businesses and road users if we read it the way we do in this morning's paper. And it was quite a shock for us to actually see that this was happening. We only learned about it on Tuesday morning, and it was coincided with us actually having our council meeting on Tuesday afternoon. So it was discussed at full length. We have grave concerns as this is a major thoroughfare, George Street, and the impacts it'll have, as far as we can see, is that if the barn dance restructuring or phasing is going to be lengthened, which I understand that is the case, that means that the traffic flow travelling across George Street from east to west will be, of course, impacted in the fact that there'll be delays, which will cause congestion with traffic travelling on St Andrew, Hanover, and of course, Murray Place. Also, the other concern we have is that public transport will obviously have to be rerouted because the buses will not be able to negotiate George Street if there's going to be speed bumps put in there. So therefore, the public transport will have to use Great King Street, I take it, which of course will impact the congestion in and around the public hospital. And I see that the speed limit proposed at 10 kilometres an hour actually extends right up to Albany Street on George Street. So that'll of course mean that the public transport coming down George Street will have to negotiate the 10 kilometre an hour speed limit and obviously speed bumps between Albany Street and Frederick Street, where of course they'd turn off to go down onto Great King Street. The 10 kilometres an hour we feel is absolutely ridiculous. 10 kilometres an hour is almost at walking pace. And the other point, of course, is how's it going to be enforced? The other concern we have is that the plans for the rerouting or changing of the one-way street system with the rebuild of the new hospital, surely that's going to change the flow of traffic through the city. And now, of course, we're going to have changes in George Street. So all that will impact on each other and of course will harm traffic or congest traffic moving across the city. We also would like to know whether there's been any modelling done on this, or has this just come straight out of the blue? And if there has been modelling done on it, we wouldn't mind having a look at that. The other concern was that we, of course, Mr. Weatherall, who spoke to you earlier, has presented a petition with, I understand, around about 6,000 names on it, when that's, of course, been presented as a result of the discussions earlier on the pedestrianising of George Street. Surely that's got to have some impact on that, and have the council looking at to see whether what they're doing here is the right thing or not. We'd also like to see, and we haven't seen yet, the report from when the Octagon was closed a few months ago, just to see what the impact was on businesses and traffic flows through the city during that period of time. Now, as I said, we've got no issue with the redevelopment of George Street, because some of our 45,000 members actually have businesses in George Street. But what we are concerned about is the lack of consultation on this matter. And if there is going to be a chance for consultation, we would like to be part of that. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Malcolm. I'll start with the questions. Are you happy to take questions?
Yeah, no problem at all.
Two things. First of all, in terms of the Octagon, that report, councillors haven't seen that yet either. That'll be coming to us in the normal course of events sooner rather than later. In terms of George Street, I just wonder if you have received the report that was discussed in public and reported in the paper in the middle of last year about the initial design consultation, very extensive report and analysis. Did that ever make its way into the hands of the AA?
No, it did not. We've just seen
Right,
what was
well,
in the media.
That's fine. We'll get it to you because that will be useful for your members to know. First question is Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Mr. Budd. I got a little confused through your submission because I want some clarity. It seemed to me you were submitting around the Central City Plan and George Street redevelopment, but that was being conflated with the proposal around keeping people safe in a post-COVID situation, a level 2 COVID situation. But my question is to ask you what options your council came up with that we could put in place to support that physical distancing if we didn't put in place the measures that we have proposed.
We haven't actually discussed on the physical distancing of it, but what we don't want to see is a speed limit reduced to 10 kilometres an hour. We feel that that's just absolutely ridiculous. I do understand that there's going to be the widening of the footpaths, and I understand that is for the social distancing, but surely George Street can abide by the social distancing like other places around the city go, and we can't see that it needs to be to the extent that it is here in George Street.
Thank you. Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm really asking is, in your view, what should the process for consulting on these issues be?
Well, we would like to be involved in perhaps a working committee set up with stakeholders as to what the council is proposing to do, and then we sit down around the table and discuss the benefits of the project.
And that would include a wide range of stakeholders, would you think?
Well, I think it would those that are immediately affected would be the spokes, AA, etc.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. Budd. Question. One of the keys we keep reading about in the paper that we'll be discussing later is about the safety of the CBD area. And when I look at the 30-kilometre-hour current status of those roads, are they unsafe?
I don't believe they are. We've never seen any evidence that it hasn't been unsafe at 30 kilometres an hour, and we would reinforce that to stay as 30 kilometres an hour.
Thank you. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora, Malcolm, and thank you for your presentation. My question is around, were council of a mind to provide more space for pedestrians in order to keep them safely distant from each other? Would your, as a method for achieving this, would your membership prefer the proposed option on today's agenda, which is slowing traffic down so that people can safely use the road, or removing the existing car parking along that stretch of George Street, which would be the alternative option to provide greater pedestrian space?
We would actually support the latter.
Thank you.
And I would support the latter personally, because with less parking, you might get more people on your PT.
That's a very unequivocal statement. Thank you very much. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Butt, I just want to clarify, when you were talking about the consultation, you are still talking about the COVID-19 response, right? Because we've just come out of a level 4 and we're in, I think we're in level 2 today. How would we consult, and I guess this was brought up earlier, how would we consult in a situation where the ability to get together is very limited and very difficult?
Yep, I agree with that, and I totally accept that. But I think in this situation, the impact that this is going to have on the city, both businesses and traffic flow, may be the council's rushing into this a wee bit. There should be a bit more time spread out to discuss it and consult with the stakeholders.
Okay, and then sort of to follow up with that, then you are aware that this is only for the period of until social distancing is removed, right? It's gazetted for a long time, but it will turn off the second social distancing is removed.
Yeah, but we're frightened that this might be the opening to pedestrianised George Street. First step.
But that would be guessing our motivation rather than dealing with. Yeah. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Budd. Your comments are appreciated. We'll make sure that report comes to you and look forward to your ongoing engagement around whatever tables people need to sit to finalise these decisions. The next group in the public forum is Generation Zero. I've got them, looks like we've just had them omitted. There they are, connecting. Greetings, Lydia. It's Lydia Legros. Are you on your own or have you got a partner? You've got a partner, you're both there. Hello, Jen. Welcome back. Can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Hello?
You're Lydia?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. And Jen? No, you're on mute, Jen. No, you're not.
Now?
I unmuted you. Great. 5 minutes are yours. Who's first?
Thank you, that's me. So kia ora, my name is Lydia, and I'm speaking to you today with Jen on behalf of Generation Zero. We are a nationwide youth climate justice advocacy group who campaigns for a just transition to a zero carbon economy. So as we noted in our annual plan hearing, we would like to encourage Dunedin Council to apply for the Waka Kotahi NZTA Innovating Streets for People Fund. And we think this is a great opportunity to develop our CBD and create a safer, more vibrant city centre. So the fund is very generous and it provides 90% of funding for temporary projects. And these are projects that improve street safety and support physical distancing measures. They are open to funding a range of tactical urbanism techniques and that can be used to encourage active and public transport, to increase foot traffic with distancing, and to support conditions that increase profits for local businesses and to keep those who use our streets, be it pedestrians and cyclists, safe. And we've already seen Auckland Council take advantage of this opportunity, and they've done so by deploying measures to get Aucklanders moving again. This has been by widening footpaths safely and setting up pop-up cycleways. And we know Dunedin Council is today considering proposals to support people getting out and about. So we support what's being done, but we want the council to develop a plan beyond the next month and to take the opportunity offered by this funding to start to reimagine a better city in the longer term. So the timing of this package is therefore really exciting. And it is an ideal way to harness our community's COVID-19 awakened interest in how to use our public space for safer use. And the fund hopes to assist councils, in doing just that. And so to recap, this could include safety improvements at road intersections, placemaking improvement projects, setting up temporary bike lanes and footpath extensions, which allow for social distancing, as well as for one-off awareness raising events that help communities reimagine their streets. It's also important to note that it also provides guidance to help support businesses trade and bolster economic activity while meeting physical distancing requirements. And I will now pass on to Jen.
Thank you. Jen.
Yeah, so the projects that would be funded by the Innovating Streets for People Fund must be like fast, light, cheap, and have a long-term strategic focus that relates back to council's existing plans. So we do encourage council to consider the Central City Plan, the consultation that happened there, especially under the George Street redevelopment, when developing plans for tactical urbanism in the area. Specifically, we do want you to keep front of mind the principles that were developed out of that consultation, namely putting people first, creating an Otapoti Dunedin sense of place, greening the city, and making George Street and the retail quarter a destination. What we've learned from international case studies that Generation Zero provided during that consultation, good urban designs can have huge benefits for local businesses, for pedestrian safety, and for the general amenity of our city. The second round of Innovating Streets funds opens on June 8th and submissions close July 3rd. Generation Zero encourages the council to apply for this fund, not only for the proposals before you today, but also for projects that would transform our city centre in the long term. We also encourage council to work in partnership with local iwi and disability advocates to ensure that these projects uplift all members of our community, and to also make sure that you are seeking feedback around these projects. We're now happy to take your questions.
Thank you. First question goes to Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, ladies. Question about the Innovating Streets funding. I take it you've read all the information quite extensively, and you're aware that it does say that any project must be able to demonstrate the value of using tactical urbanism to advance future permanent change. And I reinforce that permanent change and explain how they will move to permanent changes. Can you elaborate? So how do you see the funding working for Dunedin?
How do I see it working? Well, for example, take the retail plan that's already had a lot of consultation. It's quite down the road in terms of where its vision is at. From there, you could take trials and trial particular bits of the plan, and then see what works, see what doesn't, and fully fund in a permanent sense the things that do work, and to improve the things that don't.
Sorry, thank you. Councillor Elder.
Kia ora and welcome. Thank you for your input. The question I have is, you say Generation Zero is all for a just transition to carbon zero, and you alluded to consultation and being inclusive and transparent. And I'm just wondering if that means that the retailers are involved in that conversation and that it's a journey together rather than having a plan and then imposing it. That's my question. What's the best process for getting along our journey together?
Absolutely. Of course, everyone who is intimately affected needs to be brought on the journey together. But it's also vitally important not only to take into consideration those whose businesses and livelihoods are kind of dependent on this, but also what the experts say, right? So whether that be the international best practice in the Global Street Design Guide, or specific urban design and community experts, they also need to be brought in along the journey with local iwi. And I do want to stress that there are ongoing obligations on council to act as a good treaty partner, to make sure that those who are elderly or disabled, that the space works for them. So yeah, need to include everyone and bring everyone along on the
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. I have two questions, but I've tried to be quick. The first one is there's a density question that's asked sometimes. So people say, oh, well, Auckland gets away with good outcomes because it has that many more people. Would you, what's your comment on the density rather than the absolute number of people in the north end of town where a lot of this is being proposed?
Well, of course, increasing density in the centre city is one of Generation Zero's, I guess, goals. So that is something that we would encourage long term. But fundamentally, it doesn't matter whether you've got 200 people in a square kilometre or 400 people in a square kilometre. You still need to provide a valuable streetscape that's going to build resilience in our community.
So your answer really is that the density isn't as important as the streetscape itself with the outcome. And then the other question is, OUSA came by at the annual plan and suggested Dundas Street and Albany Street for upgrades as well in this particular area. And I've always thought that King Edward Street and South Dunedin, especially with the new community hubs going in, would also be an area. So would you consider, we want to consider these as well as the George Street?
Absolutely, 100%. I think including the tertiary precinct, South Dunedin, and also the heritage precinct along these lines would be, you know, those are all areas that do need quite a lot of revitalisation quite urgently.
Great,
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, hi. And I won't patronise you by referring to you as ladies. So thank you, Lydia and Jen. The previous speakers have all had a critique of the lack of consultation, and it appears from what you're saying that Gen Zero have been very much engaged in the central city engagement process. Do you feel that there has been a lack of consultation?
For this specific proposal, I think that yes, council could have done better, but I think that about every single consultation council does, right? Like you can't spend too much time, too much resource on kind of bringing the community along and seeing what their perspectives are and trying to build a vision for our future together. Whether this proposal goes out to a formal consultation or even just gets a little bit of feedback, that would be amazing. And I would kind of expect council to be doing not necessarily something along the lines of, but something very similar to that central city plan engagement. I know that Catherine Ward and Garrett Chin spent a lot of time and energy into that consultation. I think that that was actually one of the better ones out of what we've seen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I'll leave it there. We're well over time again. Thank you, Jen and Lydia, for your input. I hope you'll have the time to be engaged as we continue. That's it for those two contributors. Thanks very much. Have a safe afternoon.
Thank you very much.
And we'll now go to, and thanks colleagues for your cooperation in trying to keep to time. We're now going to Mr. Thompson, who's our final submitter on this marathon. Richard, are you there somewhere?
Yeah, I am. I'll just start the video, sorry.
That's all right. Oh, we've got everything. And the picture. Richard, you know the Jen here, you've got 5 minutes and then questions if you're happy to take them.
Sure. Look, my speaking today is largely prompted by the reaction to today's agenda item rather than the agenda item per se. And it's focused on the wider issue of Main Street retail and George Street redevelopment. I did say when I left council that if I started writing letters to the editor or appearing at council forums, someone should shoot me and put me out of my misery. But in my defence, the last couple of months have not been normal, so that may have affected my attitude. I haven't shaved for 7 weeks in preparation for life on a park bench. I do genuinely get it that the future of bricks and mortar retail is at stake, and getting big decisions wrong isn't in anyone's interest. But I guess this latest proposal exemplified for me the low level of debate that we've sunk to around the retail quarter redevelopment and issues associated with it. In itself, what you're debating today is a largely inconsequential short-term reaction to an extraordinary set of circumstances. It doesn't fundamentally change anything for the long term, and yet it was greeted with the usual slogans. Pedestrianisation jammed down people's throats, ideologically driven, business has spoken and they are opposed to this. It was probably that last comment that made me the crossest. So I really want to make a distinction, if I can today, between consultation and research that might inform consultation and how you might do that as well as possible. I need to say that every single person who walks into my store is at that point in time a pedestrian. How they got there is important, but there are other things that are equally important. Why have they come? What are the factors that drive the behaviour of those that have not come? What do we know about the different behaviours of different demographics, and what does that mean for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Everybody used to love Penrose's, but as its customers slowly died, then so did it. Retail has to adapt to change, and to do that it needs really good data, not slogans. There are about 30 car parks between Hanover Street and the Octagon, and a third of those are P5s. The notion that those 30 car parks and any decrease in them holds the future of Dunedin retail in its hands is frankly ludicrous. So I want to urge a more knowledge-based debate around this wider development issue. What I want to know to be able to adequately engage in consultation is what has worked nationally and internationally, and what principles might we determine from that? And then how do those principles relate to Dunedin's specific situation? I want to know what are the factors that actually drive consumer behaviour. For example, if it's simply convenience, then web sales is going to trump any number of car parks you can provide. But if car parks are a key factor, then how do you enable that with all of the other things that impact customers' choices? And those things, in my view, will not be answered well by retailers. They need to be answered by research with customers, both the ones that we have now and, equally importantly, the ones who currently go elsewhere. When we understand that, we can build that into our planning, and we can provide an evidence base to inform debate and consultation. And so I would urge a focus around answering those questions. And you need to do that for the medium term, not the short term. Every change any council makes will hurt someone. The question should be, is it the right thing for the sector or the city over the long term? But so much focus goes on individual retailer stories. Yes, change will mean some people are now in the wrong place for their business and they will be hurt and angry, but that cannot be the reason why we do not adapt. If you want to know how to run a gift and homeware store, I'm your man. But if you want to know what the factors are that create a dynamic, vibrant retail quarter, well, I'm just as opinionated as the next person. But that is what it is, my opinion. So asking retailers is just not going to give you the knowledge base you need. Researching customers in a Dunedin context will, if it's done well, and that is not the same thing as consultation. And it'll cost possibly a lot, but so will getting the retail precinct wrong. It's a bit like something else I do know a little bit about. If you want to know what the best treatment is for some disease, then a senior doctor is your person to ask. But if you want to know what impacts whether a patient takes the treatment, believes in the outcome, turns up for the appointment, believes in the doctor, then you'd better ask the patient, because the answers will often be poles apart. I'm happy to take questions.
That was a supremely well timed 5 minutes and 5 seconds. Thanks, Richard. Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Richard. How difficult is it in the retail environment now post-COVID and level 2? It was hard enough going into pre-COVID, but now how difficult is it, and the restrictions you're having to put on within the stores?
Andrew, if you ask me that question in 2 weeks, I might have a sensible answer for you. I can tell you it's not as difficult as being closed completely, but we simply don't have the data yet. It's the first day for almost all retail to be open, and so I don't know. I can tell you though that in the lead up to closure, and it was a different set of circumstances because people's alarm was growing, whereas now it's dissipating. But the impact on retail was very strong well before we ever closed the doors.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks, Richard. I've heard another quote that if you really want the most effective treatment, ask the junior doctor. You brought up the concept of consultation, and we have also been wrestling with the term engagement, and I think that might be what you might be alluding to, is that consultation and engagement may be two different things, that when consultation is a formal act that an organisation goes through, whereas engagement is listening and effectively co-designing and coming out with all of the affected parties, because you mentioned that retailers, while they're an affected party, are not the only people who are actually important and the voice for the future of the city. What's your comment on, what's your thought about that, about the difference between consultation and engagement?
Look, I think it does summarise in a sense what I'm saying. I think, you know, if you go out and ask the public, do you want a government to fund an extra week's leave for you? The answer from every single person will be yes.
Yes.
If you ask them, would you prefer that versus easier access to getting hip and knee replacements, then their answer might be a bit different. So the information that you're able to put in front of people determines often the nature of the consultation process. And I don't think that we are as good at that as we could be, because we struggle to get information out in a way that people can understand it. And so I suppose, yes, I don't want to say that retailers don't have a role in making this decision. Of course they have a perspective to bring, but it's wider than that. And it's about how you get principles-based decisions that have a clear database that people can actually see why you're suggesting this and how it relates to this particular environment. I'll give you a simple, two quick simple examples. Dunedin does not have a standalone mall. It's not in the main street. That in itself makes it substantially different to what might happen in other places where they're talking about what they do with the main street. Secondly, I don't understand why click and collect is so important when if somebody can order something over the web from me and I'll pay for it to deliver it. Why do they want to come and pick it up? But that's becoming a bigger and bigger part of retail. So therefore, if you're thinking about how do you plan for the long term, then the ability for retailers to survive needs a good understanding of how that change in particularly younger people's behaviour is going to impact the interface between the front door of the retail shop and how the customer wants to operate. So that's the kind of information that we actually have to understand to make the right kind of decisions.
Great. And
Thank you.
I'll let the chair move it on. Thanks.
Councillor Elder.
Oh, thank you, Richard. I really enjoyed your presentation. From what I hear, you're saying people need more information, good information to make good decisions. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, I believe that. I'm not suggesting the information doesn't exist. But something as major of this is the way in which you engage with a representative section of the population, bearing in mind that what 15 to 30-year-olds think about retail and how they shop is hugely different to what 50 to 70-year-olds think about it. So depending on who you're getting your feedback from, you will get completely different pictures. And so it's about having the right information and being able to put it in front of the different demographic groups and have them consider that and then say, well, bearing that in mind, I think this is more important than that.
And so would you see those different demographics being in the same room and hearing one another so that they gain understanding?
I think that's useful. I think there's a whole pile of things around meeting dynamics that that influence things. But you know, there are ways of doing that kind of research. The kind of, you know, locally grown 1,000 minds kind of approach lends itself to these kinds of decision making, because it forces you to confront alternatives rather than just thinking about a single thing that might be your preconceived opinion. So that's a useful thing. Getting focus groups around a table who have different views about things, that's also useful. All of those things have value. What I'm suggesting has little value is simply going and asking people whether they want to sign a petition on whether George Street should be one way or have more or less parks or whatever, because you will get the predictable outcomes because nobody has to think about it.
All right, thank you. And we're well over time again, so that's the end of that presentation. Richard, thank you very much for taking the trouble to come in. I'm sure that you will stay involved in this discussion. Good luck. No one's coming to shoot you. And have an enjoyable afternoon. Thank you, councillors. That takes us to the confirmation, the item 2 of the agenda, which is apologies. You will have noticed the presence of Councillor Staines, so we have none. I move that those apologies be sustained. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Barker. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. I see enough hands. That's agreed. Item 3, the confirmation of the agenda. Now, we do need to have some discussion here because there's an issue in respect of item 6 and the discussion of item 6 as it relates to the status of Councillor Raddick. And so what I'm going to ask, first of all, I'm going to explain that we've had a request to delay item 6 till later in the agenda. There are also some other matters that need to be traversed, and so we're going to go to Mr. Garbutt for the legal advice about the background to the issue that we have on the table for us to discuss, be informed about, and possibly decide on this afternoon. So, Ms. Graham, Mr. Garbutt, can you hear us?
Loud and clear. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. The floor is yours, Mr. Garbutt. If you could explain the background and what advice you have for us, that would be appreciated.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The reason I'm speaking is that Councillor Raddick has been in touch with staff about potential conflict of interest, and the Audit Office have determined that he had a pecuniary interest in relation to the George Street upgrade issue that is being dealt with through the annual plan. We were asked to advise whether that might extend to the item 6 on your agenda today for this committee in relation to George Street, and we've done that. Our advice is that it does, and that he does have a pecuniary interest. Councillor Raddick has sought his own legal advice, which is fine. His solicitor has been in touch this morning and asked that item 6 be delayed for 12 hours so that he can seek advice from his solicitor, and has since emailed me just at the start of this meeting asking that the item 6 be delayed so that Councillor Raddick can obtain approval from the Office of the Auditor General to participate in the debate and vote on that item. So that request has come in by his solicitor, and I've encouraged the chair to raise it and suggested that the meeting needs to decide whether the item 6 is to proceed or to be delayed the 12 hours as the solicitor has requested.
Thank you, Mr. Garbutt. Well, procedurally, Ms. Graham, do you want to make any comment at this point?
No, not at this point, Your Worship, but procedurally we could accommodate that request were it the will of the meeting.
All right. Well, what I'm going to suggest, councillors, is that we take some, it seems to me that there's no issue in principle about our discussion being delayed, but given what this paper is about, which for me is a public safety and public health issue exclusively, actually, and as well as being, and not exclusively, as well as being an attempt to assist retailers in a very difficult set of circumstances. I'm wondering operationally what, if any, difficulties or problems we might confront by a delay, even to first thing tomorrow or tomorrow morning sometime. So, Dr. Bidrose, do you want to make some comment about to that end, please?
Yes, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
When we received this request, I went and talked to the operational staff and to Simon Drew, and he talked around his staff. Their plan is to begin the process of, should you vote yes, of rolling this change out this afternoon. There are more than 70 street speed limit signs to put in place. There are literally hundreds of, in order to, as you might imagine, this hasn't been an easy process to pull together in a week. And if we're going to give people 2 metre distancing by enabling them to work on the road, there's considerable safety issues that need very careful management, particularly because of what we're hoping will be large numbers of people walking on the road, and how to share that space with cars. So the operational plan in practice is to paint many circles on the road with the Dunedin logo on that remind people that the road space is cars and cars and scooters and pedestrians and cycles and so on, and that's the slow space. That will take, so from starting this afternoon, the expectation is that would take until it gets dark this evening, and then almost all of tomorrow. So the implication, if they don't start until 10:30 tomorrow morning, because presumably you aren't going to want to meet at 1:30 tonight. So if you had this meeting deferred till tomorrow morning, the implication would be that it wouldn't be complete, but it definitely would not be complete by Saturday, in time for what we are hoping is going to be numbers of people returning to the CBD. In order to shop. I don't know if any of you have seen the queues today of people lining up down the footpath. I think at one point there were 30 people in the queue waiting for a haircut at one of the men's barber shops. And the idea, so it's not so much retail equipment on the footpath, but people being able to queue and leaving people walking in each direction 2 metres space on the footpath. There isn't enough room. So if you want to accommodate that by allowing people to walk on the road, then as I say, we would not be able to operationalise that in time for Saturday morning, which means that by Saturday morning it would be half done, and until Monday, middle of Monday, there would be some risks with that. So I cannot quantify what those risks are.
All right, well, in terms of the process, unless someone advises me differently, it seems to me that the most sensible thing to do in terms of the discussion of the confirmation of the agenda, that given that we've received this request for the reasons outlined, that I'll move that item 6 be deferred until a reconvening of this meeting at 9 AM tomorrow morning. Is there a seconder for that course of action? Seconded by Councillor Elder. I don't think I need to speak to it. I think the issue is quite clear. So unless anyone has a further question of staff, Councillor Wiley does.
Yeah,
Go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, I want to get an understanding of this. We're now essentially considering the motion that the Mayor emailed out earlier. It will be item 6, is that correct?
Well, the motion that was emailed to all of us is part of the discussion of item 6, that's correct. But that's not what we're talking about now.
No, totally understand that. I totally appreciate that. What I am trying to get an understanding of is that's quite a different motion than what was originally put on the table. And when I'm looking at the motion that we essentially could be looking at with the Mayor's motion that he emailed through this afternoon, I cannot see where Councillor Raddick would be at a peculiar interest. There's nothing there that I can really see that talks about retail.
Councillor, I don't think you should go down that line. It's not a matter for you to provide the legal advice which the Auditor General already has and which Mr. Garbutt is employed by us to do.
Okay, so can I ask a further question then?
Who are you asking?
I'll ask it through you, the chair. The question I then have is, I understand that, and most likely Councillor Raddick went through the process with Mr. Garbutt and the whole legal issue based on the original motion, not on this new motion that we are essentially going to be looking at.
Well, perhaps we should ask Mr. Garbutt to comment to that, and he may need a minute or two to look at the text you're talking about. Mr. Garbutt. Sorry. Yep, Mr. Garbutt.
Yes, thank you. I was working off the original public agenda. I haven't seen the Mayor's motion circulated today.
All right, well, we'll adjourn for 5 minutes. I'll move. Seconded by Councillor Fiso. This is an adjournment until 2:55. The meeting is adjourned. Everyone back on deck? What's happened to the video here? So I've got it.
Yeah.
All right, we are back. The meeting has reconvened. I'll go first of all back to Mr. Garbutt for comment on the modified motion that was questioned earlier.
Yes.
Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you, Councillor. I've read that motion from the Mayor now, thank you, and it's clearly a more detailed motion that picks up on the staff recommendation. So it doesn't change the substance of what was recommended by staff. It's a more clear resolution picking up on the substance. So certainly in my view, it doesn't change anything from what I'd already said.
So in your view, the conflict identified by the Auditor General still exists in relation to that motion?
Yes, it does. In terms of Councillor Radich having a pecuniary interest in the issues that are recommended by staff to be changed to George Street, yes.
Right, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Are there any further questions before we go to the debate? Councillor Stones.
Thank you, Chair. I have a concern here because I've changed things today to enable me to attend this meeting. I'm in the middle of a house move. So if this item gets moved to tomorrow, I have commitments that won't allow me to attend. So this is a question of a councillor who has made himself available for this meeting, who will not be able to make himself available tomorrow. Why should I not be able to take part in this debate when another councillor will be, potentially?
Thank you, Councillor. Further questions anywhere? All right, we'll go to debate then. Oh, Councillor Wiley, you've already had one. Another one?
Yes, again, through the chair, a follow-up question to Mr. Garbutt. I'm also understanding the original issue that was put on the table to him around the George Street upgrade. But as we go through this paper, this is about the CBD. This is not just about the George Street. So I'm sort of getting quite confused in the sense of how we're ruling out a councillor who has an interest and a partial interest in one piece of George Street, yet this discussion is about the CBD. It's taking in Princess Street through to Moray Place, Lower Stewart Street, etc.
Well, I'll see if there are any other questions of Mr. Garbutt, and we'll make Mr. Councillor Lord.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, Chair. This is just a question for you. I have missed. Sorry, what is going to happen in the next 12 hours? Is this for Councillor Radich to produce a contrary opinion, or what will be different by tomorrow?
Well, I think I'm not sure. I'll speak. You'll hear my view in due course when we start the debate. But I think Mr. Garbutt should answer that question as well. And I think Dr. Bidrose already did partially. So can we go back to Mr. Garbutt? Have you got any further comments to make in response to Councillor Wiley's second question about your view?
Yes, in terms of what Councillor Wiley is asking, the Audit Office has already determined that Councillor Radich has a pecuniary interest in the George Street upgrade, and we were asked whether it extends to this item, which we've concluded it does, because of the way in which it's designed to support retailers in George Street. So we think it does, and Councillor's been advised of that, and he's seeking his own advice, as I've already said. What I've relayed is what Councillor Radich, solicitor, has asked for, a delay of 12 hours in that item to provide him advice, and also to seek approval from the Office of the Auditor General for him to participate in the debate and vote. Whether that's achievable in the 12 hours that has been asked for, I don't know. But that's what's been asked for, so I wanted the meeting to understand that his solicitor has asked for that, and it's for the meeting, in my view, to assess that and make a decision whether you are prepared to make that delay as his solicitor has requested.
All right, well, I think it's Councillor O'Malley.
I'm reluctant to have to do this, but because I know there's lots of questions out there, but I'm just asking a general question about conflict of interest and excusing yourself from a debate. I felt that when we were being trained to come onto council, that the assessment of conflict of interest was a self-assessment, and it was up to you as to whether or not you would stay in the debate or not. Is it now the case then that if the Auditor General makes a recommendation that supersedes your own desire or choice to go in and out of a debate?
That's not a decision I'm making, Councillor, but I'm trying to have a debate about a suggestion that we decide whether we defer this or not, because of the legal opinion that's been quite clear. I'm going to go back to Mr. Garber.
Just sec, because the logic here is that it's moot.
I know it's quite clear what you're saying, and I know how the advice we've received historically. That's not quite the situation I think we're in at this point. Mr. Garber?
Well, that's what I want clarity on. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor O'Malley makes absolutely the correct point, which I agree with, that it is for each councillor to determine whether they have a pecuniary interest. All I'm saying is that we have advised Councillor Raddick he does have that. He's seeking his own advice on that, and his solicitor has asked the item be deferred. It is for Councillor Raddick to decide himself whether he participates in the item or not. And we've advised that if it proceeds today, he should not, but that's ultimately his decision.
Just also, if I might, through the chair, the genesis of this was that the question was raised that Councillor Raddick may have an interest. We worked with Councillor Raddick to write a case for the Auditor General seeking some clarity, and the Auditor General came back with some advice. So that's how the process unfolded to this point.
I have two questions. The first one is, Councillor Raddick is telling me electronically he wants to utter on this question. So I want some guidance from you about that. The second question is, can you please explain the timing in this while we're at the 11th hour, having to consider holding a meeting where obviously, as Councillor Staines has already commented, there's personal issues and availability involved. We're on the edge of doing work or not, but work that would clearly be compromised if we can't make a decision now. Why that has taken so long to get to the point where we have to look at agree to a deferral or not, when there may have been an opportunity earlier in the week to clarify this matter. Either Ms. Graham or Mr. Garber on both of those, please.
Michael will do one and I'll do the other. How about that?
That's fine.
But the genesis of this and working through this with Councillor Raddick was related to an annual plan matter, and so we sought advice as it related to the annual plan. That advice was received by the councillor and forwarded to Councillor Raddick last week. Councillor Raddick then needed time to consider it, which was reasonable, and on considering it, decided that he wished to instruct his own counsel. Again, all perfectly reasonable steps. The intervening thing that has complicated the time frame was that this report, which you are considering today, was generated at reasonably short notice following the council meeting, I think on the 4th of May, but I could be wrong with my date. So it was generated at a very short time frame. So the time frames for the two processes overlapped. And so in instructing external counsel, Councillor Raddick has had very little time to be able to do that. So it's just been a confluence of two different processes.
Thank you. Mr. Garber on the other question.
Yes, I see no issue with Councillor Raddick speaking on whether the item is considered at all today or deferred. I think that's perfectly appropriate. It's his solicitor's request that has come in. If he's got something to add to that, I think you should provide him that opportunity.
Thank you. I will do so in due course. Your Worship, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two questions. One, some advice, perhaps from you, Mr. Garbutt, around what the implications are for members should they receive advice that they do have an interest and then continue to participate in the debate, what the implications of that might be. And then I've got a question after that for the chairman.
So in response to that, the advice has been that the councillor has a risk of contravening the Local Authority Members Interest Act, which prevents each councillor debating or voting on an item which you have a pecuniary interest. If the councillor continued without approval from the Office of the Auditor General, there is a potential of breaching the Act and the risk of prosecution. And if ultimately convicted of that offence, you could be disqualified from office. So it is a serious matter in that sense.
Thank you. And just asking you, Mr. Chairman, if you could restate the motion. The motion that you have put is to confirm the agenda with the delay. So if members were of a mind to not defer the item, we would vote against your motion.
Well, I didn't actually move the confirmation of the agenda. I moved that item 6 alone, and the advice I'm receiving is that I did do that just for item 6 to be deferred until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
That's clear, thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Thank you. Yes, well, I've got quite a lot of thoughts on the matter. I similarly had questions before, but I feel I should be. I have included in the Office of the Auditor General's advice was advice as to how I might be able to participate, and so that was quite clear that it was, in the interests of the representing the public of Dunedin, the ones, in fact, that voted for me. And similarly, in this situation where you've got it's clear that the majority of the George Street retailers strongly feel that their views have been adequately represented in this action that's being voted on, or this proposal that's being voted on. And similarly, it also disadvantaged me because this is so significant to our whole community. It justifies the involvement of all members in this debate.
Thank you.
So,
Mr. Garbutt, can you confirm that that statement is correct, that the advice from the OAG is as Councillor Raddick has stated? We haven't seen it, you see, so we're at a disadvantage in that respect. You're not.
Well, my reading of the advice is that it determined Councillor Raddick has a pecuniary interest, and that if he were to participate in the discussion and voting on the George Street upgrade, he would require prior Audit Office approval, but that they would not process that until such time as the city had cleared off any common law issues of potential predetermination. So all that's been determined so far is that there is a pecuniary interest, and that's the extent of the advice as I read it.
Right, thank you.
I should also add that the issue of
I'm going to Councillor Elder for her question.
Hi, Chairman. I was just checking in that that motion was still standing for going for 9 o'clock tomorrow. And a question I had, actually, can I direct a question through you or to Chris Daines, just what time would suit him if we did defer?
No, not really, Councillor. You could move an amendment to change, or he could do so, but we are now going to go to debate the motion. Now we have a question from Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me if my dog barks, he's a wee bit noisy. Can I, through the Chair, can I ask a question of Mr. Garbutt, please?
Certainly, ask away.
Thank you. Mr. Garbutt, I believe that some councillors I just have some concerns for councillors since Mrs. Graham raised it regards around the annual plan. Now, some of the councillors that are on the council appointed representatives on community boards were asked to participate in putting forward submissions around what was on and you know, not in or out of the annual plan. Now, I had concerns about that because I had to vote on it, but we were never given any governance advice prior to that we shouldn't be inclusive in this process and what it would mean if we were involved in it. And I have serious concerns that some of us might have got involved in that because we were part of that board, and now could be told we have predetermination.
Well, Councillor, it's an issue you're welcome to get advice about, and I'm sure Ms. Graham and Mr. Garbutt will provide that, but it's not directly relevant to the conversation we're having now. So can we park that?
Sorry, Chair, it is because it's relevant to George Street.
All right, then Mr. Garbutt, would you like to make some comment, please?
I don't see the two issues as related in terms of what's gone on with the annual plan. I think that's a different topic. What you're dealing with today is a different resolution about the temporary changes to George Street to support the retailers on George Street. That's all I'm talking about today. If you want advice on general issues in relation to the annual plan, I think you should talk to staff about that.
Thank you. Councillor Raddick. Start again, please.
Yes. So speaking to that point that Mr. Garbutt just made, then surely then my issue of pecuniary interest, because this is a different issue, that's similarly not apply. And I have a two-part question. The next one being, can Mr. Garbutt confirm that the issue of predetermination has been resolved?
Mr. Garbutt.
Well, there's two parts there, Councillor Raddick. The first is that in terms of the specific item before this committee today, item 6, that's where we did consider whether the pecuniary interest affected your involvement in that, and that was the advice provided this morning that we concluded it did. We certainly didn't think there's any issue of predetermination in the common law sense in relation to the committee item today. It's just a question of whether you have a potential pecuniary interest in the issue today.
And while we're at it, is that predetermination been resolved as far as the annual plan is concerned?
No, I don't think it has.
Thank you. Councillor Wylick.
Thank you. Just would like to go back to a point that Miss Graham raised. She said a question was asked about Councillor Raddick's peculiar interest in George Street. Can I ask if that was from Councillor Raddick himself, or was it from another councillor, or was it from a staff member?
It was from a member of the public.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands, so we're going to go to a discussion of the motion. Now, the motion which I moved, and I'll speak to in a moment, is that we defer the discussion of item 6 until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. I will stay strictly with the speaking time on this for those who wish to comment. I certainly won't take 10 minutes. I'm not in favour of that because for me, there has been time where this matter could have been resolved long before this event. And more importantly, as I said earlier, in my view, the proposals which came under great pressure from staff at the request of council, supported by all but one councillor last week or whenever it was, are predominantly a matter of public safety as well as social concern for the operation of retailers. And if we are to take the steps that, whatever steps might be, because I doubt that we will all agree to everything that's in either the Mayor's amended motion or the original paper. If we're to take those steps effectively, then we need to do that sooner rather than later. And I believe the ability to take that public health action effectively would be compromised even by losing another day. So I would urge people to consider that as they form their view on whether we delay this item or not. Speakers, Councillor Vandervis.
Given that we're only talking about an overnight delay till tomorrow morning, I don't believe that there'll be a lot of work done over the night time, and I don't think that delay has a significant safety aspect. In terms of natural justice, the DCC has had time to get its lawyer lined up and to get that opinion put in front of us. For us only to have the legal opinion from one side and not get it from the other, I believe, on what is an important issue, a more general issue of conflict and representation, I believe that simply having a delay till 12 o'clock tomorrow morning, till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, is in the interests of getting balanced legal opinion. It will help resolve an issue which is going to come back and haunt us continually otherwise, and that the alternative opinion, or whatever opinion Mr. Raddick's lawyer is able to produce, will be of significant value in terms of us looking at this particular issue, but other issues going forward. So I support the motion that we leave it until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I don't believe any work that's significant is going to be done overnight. And I believe that the DCC have had their legal opinion very well traversed in front of us. Mr. Raddick should be able to have his legal opinion traversed to balance that. Thank you.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I consider this item to be a public health matter. It's around the public good, and there is a real urgency for this. If people are going to get the reassurance about coming back into the city, and we heard that really clearly through the annual plan hearings, then these matters need to be attended to promptly. So I can't support this motion. We need to be dealing with this today.
So, Councillor, just for the sake of clarity, you said you can't support the motion, or you can support the motion?
No, for clarity, I can't support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My feeling is that it is about public good and about natural justice. So I would like this moved on till tomorrow morning, because I don't think that we are actually going to hold up the works too greatly. I am concerned that whether or not, when you have a legal condition that's being questioned, if both sides have not had time to present their cases in time for this meeting, then I would like to see Councillor Raddick's opinion be allowed to be considered before we go on to deciding whether he can or cannot sit at this meeting, on this item. And given that he's raised this, I think, in a timely enough manner based on the time that was available to him, that he should be given the opportunity for us to get an answer. I understand, I know that Councillor Raddick in his declarations has received money from shop owners while running for the election, and so the link's probably pretty strong there. But I would like his lawyers to have a chance to make that case before we decided whether or not there is in fact a pecuniary interest that would always effectively preclude him from almost all debate around this section of George Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a question really, because it seems to me that the request from Councillor Raddick's counsel is in two parts. One is to defer the meeting for at least 12 hours, but also within that time, advice has been requested and received by the Office of the Auditor General. Is that correct?
As I understand it, yes.
Can anyone...
Mr. Garbutt, do you want to make any comment about the Mayor's question?
Yes, I can. We certainly had Councillor Raddick's lawyer on the phone just before lunch asking for a 12-hour deferment to that item, and a follow-up email at about 1 o'clock asking that the item be deferred to enable the councillor to obtain approval of the Office of the Auditor General to participate in debate and vote. So the two didn't quite line up, and as I said, I don't know whether prior approval from the Office of the Auditor General could be obtained by 9 o'clock tomorrow. I severely doubt it.
So,
But that's what's been asked for.
So were council to support this motion to defer the meeting or defer this item until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, there would be no guarantees that the request of the councillor had been met regardless.
I think at least it would give Councillor Raddick the opportunity to take advice from his solicitor, which was asked for over the phone. It would achieve that. The second part, whether it would give enough time to obtain prior audit office approval, I'm very doubtful it would.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of natural justice, I do support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, and thank you to His Worship for raising an issue I wanted to raise. My point is basically I can't support the motion, and my basis, having been an elected member for quite a long time, is the fact that we should all be aware of our conflict obligations and accept that we sometimes, because of that, have to miss out on certain debates. That's a reality and part of our status as elected members. And following on from what the question the Mayor asked of Mr. Garber, is my fear is that this may not be resolved tomorrow and may lead to us sort of getting engaged in a legal quagmire that may go on for an extended period. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wiley.
I will support this motion, and I would agree with many of the speakers ahead of me, including Councillor Vandervis and O'Malley. I think the biggest problem that I have is the fact that actually, first off, we had an email come in from the Mayor at 1:02 p.m. and notifying us that the intention of changing the motion. And I sort of look at that and I go, and that to me quite dramatically changed, in my view, the position that Councillor Raddick was in. And I think when you take the two and put it together, I'm going, actually, you know what, there is a request here for more time, and through natural justice, there is a very clear purpose of doing this. I do find it quite frustrating that this hasn't been dealt with before, and I totally sympathise with Councillor Staines and whether he can or may miss tomorrow's debate on and review of the agenda item. But I think in fairness to everyone and to the community, we do have to allow Councillor Raddick to pursue his legal position.
Councillor, I think we all find it frustrating in the extreme, but your statement about the Mayor's recrafted motion has already been refuted. Well, I'm sorry, Councillor, you can shake your head if you like, but in answer to your question, you were told it made no difference. The next speaker is Councillor Raddick.
To start with the question, do I get to speak to this motion? Mr. Chair?
You've got the floor.
Yes, thank you. So I have been full bore on getting my conflict of interest sorted out for the annual plan deliberations and for the council meeting coming up at the end of the month. And that was all there was on the horizon as of last week, Friday. But of course, this new proposal was sprung on us on Monday. And so there's been a very short Monday at the end of the day. So it's a very short period of time to get anything ready for this meeting. And so you can be sure that emails have been flying, conversation has been had on the phone, and as Mr. Garbutt will say, will tell you that there's been quite a bit of discussion about getting it sorted for this meeting. But it's a very tight time frame, and so naturally, I support the motion to have some extra time to try and pull it together.
Thank you. Councillor Stones.
Obviously, I can't support the motion because by supporting it, should it be successful, I'm removing myself from the debate. And I take it seriously that I should be part of this debate. So we have a situation where one councillor has a potential conflict of interest, and that when it or if it's resolved, would allow him to speak. But because the meeting has been, the item has been moved, it would take away my right. So I will be voting against it.
Thank you. Councillor Lord.
Yes, look, I've listened to all the speakers so far, and I do have sympathy. I think this is an issue that does need to be dealt with. The problem I have is that I too have got obligations tomorrow morning. It doesn't mean I won't be able to zoom in, but it will be on my cell phone, and it may be from a limited coverage area. So I feel penalised, but yet in the greater interest, I feel that I should still support this.
All right, there's no other indication of anyone wishing to speak. Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you. And I won't prolong proceedings any further. My concern about the motion is that I'm not confident that the legal issues that have been raised by the councillor will be resolved by 9 o'clock and tomorrow morning. I don't know how busy people think, or the capacity people might think the Office of the Auditor General has right now, but I don't imagine they're just sitting around waiting to do some work for us.
Can I just, just a point of order, hasn't the Mayor already spoken?
Where's the point of order?
That His Worship has already spoken.
He has. I'm allowing to speak again finally.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, apologies. There were questions earlier. I don't think there will be the capacity to resolve the issues that have been raised by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So we will end up then being in the situation where we won't be able to debate it tomorrow either, and then it will be deferred again further to the following week, and we end up in a long slow motion legal filibuster where in order for a councillor who has received advice both from the Office of the Auditor General and Council's counsel that they have a pecuniary interest in this matter. No one gets to debate this, and the outcome is that we don't get to have the debate, and we don't get to consider the public good and the public safety outcomes that some of us are quite keen to see be put in place to support our community in an environment where they are being asked to maintain physical distance from each other, and at the same time we're trying to actively encourage people back into the city centre. So, and denying us the ability to have that debate either today or tomorrow or next week, it just extends the risk, I think, that we are putting our community at by not making every endeavour, and every endeavour, by the way, in this case, isn't particularly radical at all, to try and keep people safe and to try and encourage people back into our CBD. So I don't think that sacrifice is worth making, and I will be voting against the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hurleyhan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I will be supporting this motion, as I would for any of you. If you had this situation, I would support you as well, because it's fair, and I believe we have to be fair. I want to be treated fairly. Why shouldn't Councillor Raddick?
Thank you. There are no other speakers, and so I don't think it's necessary for me to exercise my right of reply. My view is clear, and it's simply that I would like to see this work done sooner rather than later. So I'll call it by division. Can I ask some boffin hiding somewhere to call that, please, Ms. Adamson or Ms. Lapham or someone?
This is Ms. Lapham.
Oh, sorry, just before I do, let's be really clear. For the sake of no confusion, the motion is to defer item 6 until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Elder. Sorry, can't hear. Is that an aye?
Sorry about that. Aye.
Councillor Gary.
No.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
Aye.
Mayor Hawkins,
No.
Councillor Fiso. No. Councillor Lord,
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley,
Aye.
Councillor Redditch. Sorry.
Aye.
Councillor Staines,
No.
Councillor Vandervis,
Yes.
Councillor Walker,
No.
Councillor Wiley,
Yes.
Councillor Benson Pope.
No.
No. No. 5, 6. Motion carried 9-6.
All right, thank you, everyone. That takes us to item 3, what remains of it, and that is the confirmation of the agenda. And I will move that in regards to Standing Order 21.4, that option C be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask, before this is moved, how are we dealing with the supplementary agenda item? Is that carried on the agenda correctly?
I'm about to do that.
Sorry, I just want to make sure we didn't
And
move
that
something.
the laid on the table item referred to from the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting, it becomes item 7. That's the DCC submission on accessible streets. That's what you were referring to, Councillor?
Yes, thank you very much for your efficiency, sir.
It happens occasionally. It's not mine. It's not mine. It's those clever GSOs. Any discussion about the confirmation of the agenda as it now stands? Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. That's agreed. And that takes us to item 4. I'm going to propose in a moment we take a 5-minute break so we can all get the cup of coffee we need. But I'd remind members in terms of the declaration of interest of the need to stand aside if anyone ever needed any reminder today, and also draw people's attention. This is the first time the modified statement of members' interest has actually appeared before this committee. Draw people's attention to the changes to Councillor Raddick's conflict statements, which are highlighted in this document, and also changes to the statements from Councillor Walker and Councillor Lafiso, both of whom have deletions in terms of what they've been, in terms of their commitments.
Mr. Chair, also from Councillor Gary, there are deletions as well that are marked.
Right, thank you, Councillor Gary. I'll move that motion. I have a second, please. Councillor Elder, those in favour, please say aye. Hands enough. That's those against. There are none. Excellent. Appropriate that we take a 5-minute break before we get to the Part A reports. I'll move that we adjourn until...
Could it be 10 because I've got to boil the jug?
Oh, you need to get a better jug then. I'll move that we adjourn until 3:40 to accommodate your slow steam power, non-steam powered jug. Seconded by Councillor Walker. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, no. Aye. Thank you. The meeting is temporarily adjourned. All right, the meeting is back in session. We are discussing item 5, the footpath courtesy zone evaluation, and have to advise us and answer questions Adrian Blair and Anne Gray, both of whom are visible. So who's first, Adrian or Anne?
Mr. Chair, we're just happy to answer any questions.
All right, councillors, we are focused on item 5, the footpath courtesy zone evaluation. Are there any questions? Councillor Barker.
So I just have a couple of clarification questions. In paragraph 24, says how many respondents were there in the people's panel?
There were 192 responses to that survey.
And my second question following up from there is, what's the definition of a pedestrian incident? Is it pedestrian against pedestrian or pedestrian against e-scooter?
So for the question about pedestrian incidents, we defined a rider incidents as we gave examples of fallen off, crashed or a near miss, etc. And for a pedestrian incident, we gave examples of been hit, near miss, startled, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor van der Vis.
Happy to move the recommendations as per the order paper when that time comes.
In due course. Thank you, Councillor Elder.
Just looking at the statistics, would you say that people felt safer in the current consultation or unsafer on the footpaths? So it says in 2019 that 30% felt safer, but in 2020, 42% didn't feel safe.
I'd say it was inconclusive, and that's what we've put here.
It's inconclusive. Would you say the general comment was that people felt that they should be on the cycle lanes? Was that
the most common comment was that e-scooters should be off the footpaths, and that was the focus of that was around the footpath courtesy zone. So that was very common, that get the e-scooters off the footpaths and onto cycle lanes or a road.
And my last question was, what does discontinuing the courtesy zone mean actually? How does it affect how people go on the footpath?
So it just means, excuse me, it would just mean that the signs in that trial period, we had signs up and decals on the footpath would discontinue. So it was a trial to see how that would go.
Thank you, Anne. And just before we go to the next couple of questions, congratulations and compliments on your impeccable coughing technique. Well done. Councillor Walker.
Yes, I was thinking similarly. Thanks for the report. My question is, as we've all read, the crux of option 1 is around the fact that national legislation is likely to supersede the need for us to continue the trial. Can you just confirm when that national legislation is likely to take effect?
No, I can't do that, sorry. The Accessible Streets Regulatory Package is out for consultation at the moment. The time frame for that was extended, so that finishes it on the 20th of May. So DCC has drafted a submission for that. Beyond that, I don't know what their time frame is. I've not seen that.
So it's not even a best guess, months or a year, or because that does sort of feed into my thinking around what I would make a decision about this on.
I'm sorry, I can't
Okay,
answer that.
that's fair enough. I understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Gray and Mr. Blair, I wondered if you could comment on paragraph 32. Lime reported the average speed in the trial area, and I thought it was quite surprising. Are you confident that that's accurate?
Those figures were supplied by Lime, and they assure us that they are.
So it wasn't a typo. It was just a lot lower than I expected. And item 36, paragraph 36, talks about the decreasing trend for the number of e-scooter related ACC claims in Dunedin, and it gives the 12% claims. What have they gone down to? Or is that the figure they've gone down to? No, that's the figure they started at, but we haven't got a figure for what they've gone down to. Do you have any idea of that at all?
Not off the top of my head, the proportion of Dunedin. So that was the proportion of Dunedin ACC claims in comparison to the national total. But the trend, there's a decreasing trends nationwide and in Dunedin for the number of e-scooter claims.
But we just don't know what that is.
No, the numbers are a bit tricky in terms of confidentiality around the small numbers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the absence of further questions, I'll go to Councillor van der Vos. Do you want to speak in moving the recommendations on the order paper, Councillor?
Just briefly, the staff report is very clear. It notes the results. It notes the dramatic reduction in the number of limes and issues that are associated, and suggests that we discontinue the Footpath courtesy zone trial. It's, to me, quite conclusive and therefore something that we can easily tick off with a clear conscience, knowing that we have adequate information.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor O'Malley, any discussion? No need for a right of reply, Councillor van der Vos?
No, thank you.
I'll put it. Those in favour, please wave an arm, some part of their anatomy. Those against? That is agreed without dissent. Thank you. Let's go to item 7, accessible streets. I'll move that the item be uplifted from the table, the item referred from the meeting 2 days ago, seconded by Councillor Lord. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against no. That's agreed. As you know, we're seeking approval for the submission and also the amendments to it. We have 2 sheets. Councillor O'Malley, you can help me. Is Ms. Sargent there, or are you doing this, Jim?
I've talked to Ms. Sargent, and the emails that were sent out to all the councillors yesterday have the.
They're both the same. They're both the same, aren't they?
Yep. And
okay.
I have sent that to the GSOs to see if they could put it up on the screen, but otherwise it's the same as what you all received.
That's fine. Do you want to move them one by one or all at once?
All at once. I think the feedback I got was unanimous.
All right.
Nothing.
So moved. Someone second. Councillor Walker. Questions?
Sorry, I don't know what we're voting on. Can we please be clear what we're voting on? We're
voting on both the approval of the draft submission as amended.
Which item? Item number?
It's a supplemental agenda item.
It's item 7 on our agenda. What we've got...
I don't have a supplemental agenda here. I only have
what you should have.
7 and 8, which are both the same.
Okay, you should
just
have.
Just come up on screen.
There it is.
Thank you.
I'll give you a moment to read it. It was emailed yesterday at 7 p.m. You're normally awake at that time, Councillor.
I certainly am, but awake does not mean I'm looking at these bits of paperwork.
Yeah, but it was also sent out during the middle of the day from me as a follow-up from what happened in the infrastructure and services meeting.
Do we have a seconder for this motion, please? Did I see someone before or not?
Yes.
Councillor Elder has seconded. I think it's probably not particularly contentious given the discussion we had anyway and the other background stuff we've had. Do you want to make any further comment about it, Councillor O'Malley?
Not really, Mr. Just to say that everything that was traversed in the infrastructure and services meeting was was recirculated back to the councillors. I received some feedback. We circulated that back to Ms. Sargent, and this is what's contained in it. So this reflects the feedback from everybody in between.
Further speakers? Not seeing any. Can you take that document away so I can see people's faces, please, Jenny? Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot to be commended, I think, both in the proposals that are being put forward and in the submission that we are making on them around priorities for buses around bus stops, passing space for cyclists and pedestrians, letting cyclists use left turn lanes, and most helpfully, particularly with regard to the previous agenda item, greater clarity around micro-mobility options and also the flexibility for us to be able to deal with emerging issues and emerging technology far more efficiently than the current processes allow. And so that's all great. But I still feel like we're making pedestrians do too much of the heavy lifting in terms of providing for other road users. And unenforceable, realistically, unenforceable codes of etiquette are the only thing we have to protect our most at-risk pedestrians because we lack the political will at all levels to make our roads safer for other users. And so everybody gets shunted off onto the footpath where we then try and make that work rather than just being brave enough to make our streets safer. And I think it concerns me though, and that when I asked the question around what input we had received from disability advocates and other representative groups that have mobility challenges, the response was, well, this is a public process and they can feel free to submit on their own. I don't think that's good enough. I think we should be taking that into account in terms of how we formulate our own policies. There appears to be a disconnect here for me between a transportation approach, which is where this has come from, and how you might approach urban design and our commitments around the Global Street Design Guide and others. And so I can't tell you whether our submission adequately addresses the needs of that community because we didn't ask them. But I also don't feel like I can vote against this because there is so much here that I think is positive and worth supporting. So I will abstain on this. And I think we need to make a greater commitment, and I'll raise this in items for notification, a greater commitment to formalise how we get feedback from these affected groups and the decisions that we make. There's no excuse for our own stuff that we're in charge of the timeline. It's harder, I admit, with responding to government feedback, but it would have been better to say we don't have an opinion on this because we haven't sought one or sought input from the affected communities rather than pressing on with the view that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley, right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I will just touch on a few things that His Worship did say. To some extent, this process, the accessible streets process, is to define vehicles and where vehicles do and do not go. It's not in our submission, but I think that something the NZTA should be considering is actually space rather than vehicles. So instead of trying to define where a vehicle goes on the road, we should be thinking about defining what is each section of the road corridor. So in other words, what is the footpath, what is the slow speed zone, and what is the main zone of where traffic goes, and probably define it by speed and use rather than try to put a vehicle in a certain place on the road reserve. To the issue of the voice of the disabled groups, I can say that I was at a Disabled People's Assembly meeting yesterday, so between these two meetings, and asked them this very question. And they raised really that the Disability Issues Advisory Group is still not being formed in the council. And I think that if we are seriously going to take this group seriously, I know CEO it hasn't been formed. So the issue really is there is a mechanism by which we can do this, and that is to formally have a place in the council operating structure so that when issues like this are coming forward, we have an opportunity to interface with them. And I don't know if it's an oversight or whatever. And I don't think if we're taking, say, putting the load back on people, we should say that the Disabled People's Assemblies as the group that is supposed to be approaching us. It should be the other way around. So I will be supporting this, obviously. And I also would say I would like us to keep moving forward with the DIAG and getting it reactivated. Thank you.
Thank you. Those in favour, please say aye. Against,
aye.
no. That is agreed. Thank you.
Abstention noted, please, Mr. Chairman.
And an abstention from the Mayor. Thank you, Worship. That takes us to item 8, the notice of motion in terms of, in regard to Dunedin Rail. Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those who aren't familiar, and most should be by now, the Keep Dunedin Rail Rolling campaign, which is something that's been instituted and initiated by the RMTU, is essentially about exploring rail options that cater to both the domestic tourism market, which is where the tourism market will be in the short to medium term, but also looking at options for commuter rail in the city. And so in part, this notice of motion is in response to the submission we had from the RMTU through the annual plan hearings recently, but also it's an opportunity to give councillors the chance to reaffirm their commitment to rail ongoing in a way that may have been done at our non-public meeting when we debated the short-term future of Dunedin Railways Limited, but this provides us the opportunity to be able to do so publicly. You know, in my case, as the motion would suggest, I absolutely see the value of rail in the city, both for freight and for passengers, and that's not new and that's not just my opinion, that's council policy that dates back at least as far as the integrated transport strategy work in 2013 and was reaffirmed in no uncertain terms by way of our submissions to the GPS and the rail plan that were drafted and then adopted by council earlier this week. And just to reiterate the key parts of that discussion, this is really about trying to ensure that the environmental and social well-being opportunities that are presented by a greater investment in public transport deserve to be extended to the nation as a whole, as opposed to the current focus on the most congested traffic routes and the fastest growing populations, and Dunedin is particularly well positioned to take advantage of that. And the opportunity, if there has to be a silver lining of the decision we made around Dunedin Railways Limited, is that the greatest obstacle to running a quick and dirty commuter rail pilot has been resolved, and that we have access to rolling stock to be able to do this work should the council be of a mind to support that in a way that we probably otherwise would not have. I would like to thank Councillor O'Malley in particular for flying the flag for this politically over the last few years. It's always been clear to me that the desire exists within our community, but we'll never see if that desire translates into ticket sales unless you give people the opportunity to test the theory. And a pilot of a commuter rail service would do that, and we have the assets to do it in a way in the short term that we previously haven't. All I'm asking it for at this point, though, is a report to come to our annual plan meeting that would cost that out. What would it cost for us to run something like this with the assets that we have? And then council can weigh that up alongside all of our other considerations and all the other requests that have come in. And if we proceed from there, as I say, we'll see if the interest translates to that, and whether the attitudes, and we've certainly had no shortage of public feedback on this, whether the positive attitudes that people have towards rail in the city would be viable. And I use the word viable advisedly. I don't mean in a commercial sense, because public transport isn't a money-making venture. It's a public good, and it's I guess a philosophical debate to what extent we would be prepared to subsidise that. And again, the points made in the motion around advocacy essentially are critical here, because unless we have more supportive funding and policy settings through central government and government agencies, then it's going to make it a pretty uphill battle for us to realise the ambition that our community may have around this. So they need to work in parallel. It is certainly bigger than the rail assets that we currently own, but it presents an opportunity to test some thinking in a way that could feed into the next regional public transport plan process that the regional council will run early next year, which is where we get to consider the public transport network in a holistic fashion. So I welcome, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this, and I welcome Councillor's support for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Seconded, please. Councillor O'Malley is seconding, and he is on the speaking list. The first person is Councillor Vandervis.
My apologies. Are we speaking or asking questions?
Sorry, it's a notice of motion. If the councillor has a question, he can ask it, and it will be answered in the right of reply by the mover.
Okay, so this is my one shot at speaking. Here goes.
It's absolutely correct.
Mayor Hawkins has said that the greatest issue has been resolved. And then he said that this issue was access to rolling stock. My understanding is that there are far greater issues which have not been resolved and cannot be resolved. The first issue is the heredity of the first mile, last mile problem, which rail cannot solve, and this cannot be resolved. That is to say, you need transport to a rail head, and once you get to the station, you need transportation from there as well. So that's not resolved and can't be. The really major issue, as it affects ratepayers, is the far greater issue of how much you're prepared to subsidise an extremely expensive mode of transport, which has proven to be unserviceable, even pre-COVID, with tourist dollars subsidising it. We've got a situation where the extent of the subsidy required would be so great that the interest in rail needs testing claim by the Mayor is not what needs testing. What needs testing is whether or not there is going to be government subsidy of an extraordinary degree to try and keep a rail commuter system going over time. I don't believe that it's at all possible. It has never been possible in the South Island with tourist sub. Interest in rail needs testing just the same way that the interest in subsidised helicopter rides might need testing. Actually, no, they don't. Subsidised helicopter rides are never going to be a viable transportation system for Dunedin, and neither is commuter rail. If we are going to go ahead and spend ever more money trying to keep a rail system alive, which pre-COVID couldn't operate, couldn't maintain the necessary maintenance regimes, got itself in a situation of multi-million-dollar deferred maintenance along the lines of Aurora. What we need to do is recognise when something simply doesn't work anymore. Rail, relative to cars, keeps getting more expensive. Cars keep getting cheaper. Post-COVID is not an environment which people want to get into. Current evidence from Europe shows that people are rather going to sit in their cars for hours in traffic jams than risk infection in a rail coach. We are looking at ongoing COVID mutations. We are looking at ongoing improvements in the ideal bubble of the car, especially electric, for us to be wasting ratepayers' money trying to somehow salve the wounds of a dying rail commuter industry, I don't believe is an appropriate use of public money. I'm all for freight rail, and yes, we should be doing more rail on freight because that's heavy stuff moving from one particular point, usually to the port. That makes some kind of sense. Commuter rail in our context doesn't make any sense at all. The interest that is there is coming basically from the people that are directly involved in having just lost their jobs, very regrettably. But this was an industry which was never going to continue. And I don't believe we should be spending ratepayers' money trying to test something that simply can't work. Thank you.
Thank you. That's your time. You had 30 seconds to go, Councillor. Well done. Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. Can I clarify, is this the question section or the statement? I thought this was
It's the debate, and you have used 5 seconds of your time.
Right, okay. So, if that's the case, then I would like to say that if this is a statement time, well, we're not talking about helicopters. I mean, that's just not in reality of what we're discussing. But I want to support this motion. I think it's a brilliant idea. Councillor O'Malley and myself have been huge advocates for rail, and I'm delighted that the Mayor is joining the train. And I hope with his influence in the Green Party, he can talk to people that might make a difference. He's hoping that would be fantastic. And I just wondered, though, I had 2 questions. Given what we've talked about in relation to mothballing the Transcenic, is there any issues with what has already been voted on in this motion? That was the question I had around that. You know, like, do we need to clarify anything there or change what we've already decided? Obviously, there'd be issues with that. My second question is around marketing. I think for this to work, which I really hope it does, is that it has to be really well marketed. So will the council put some, staff and a bit of funding behind that as a campaign to let's get on rail if we go ahead with this, to give it a real fair and appropriate go? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Elder.
I can support this motion because, in fact, rail is an effective long haul option for freight. But I just want to ask a question, comment that in Auckland there are hybrid electric double-decker buses that do fast transit from one point to another, and for Mosgiel that may also be an option, considering we're considering $2 buses. And so while I applaud a feasibility study, I also believe alongside of it, we need to have other options that could be just as feasible so that we can make an informed choice. So all I'm saying is, yes, I think a feasibility study in the interests of the community is a good idea, but I also think in the interests of good decision making, we have to look at other models as well for fast transit. And indeed, the fast transit busways in Auckland have been very, very successful in moving lots of people. And I went to a land transport seminar the other day, and they said, in fact, that was cheaper than rail. So I just believe that we need to make an informed decision, in which case we need a number of options when we're looking at things. That's all. So I'm fine with that.
Thank you, Councillor Barker.
I agree with Councillor Elder about looking at all of the transportation options. I support this motion in the work of Keep Dunedin Rolling. Dunedin Railways is an icon of our city, and I thoroughly support keeping it alive as a major visitor attraction because tourism will come back. We're very fortunate, as mentioned, to have the railway tracks and the rolling stock already, not like Auckland, who's having to build all of that. And I also feel that this could help address some of the things like traffic congestion, parking and commute time. So I think it's a great motion and I support it.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also support the motion and also give thanks to Councillor O'Malley for his tenacious and ongoing advocacy around the potential for trains in the city. And just, I guess, addressing one of Councillor Van der Vis's concerns, which is a valid concern about the first and last mile. I've already been contacted by the head of sustainability at the University of Otago, and they're keen potentially to partner with anything that may be voted on or emanates in terms of looking at perhaps extending their park and ride service to include the railway station. So that's really encouraging. Already partnerships are emanating even before we've made a decision. And of course, living out here in Port Chalmers, I am often asked why we don't investigate better utilisation of the train service. Council obviously voted to look at options after the decision to mothball. So this is the perfect opportunity in my mind to investigate whether or not the paying public are able to support this to an extent that makes it viable. I don't think there's tremendous risk there for us in looking at that. I think it would be remiss of us not to support Dave Kearns' push for a 6-week trial, as he asked in the annual plan of commuter trains between Mossgiel and Dunedin. I think we owe that at least to the rail workers whose jobs are in jeopardy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have looked at this and I've debated back and forth, but I will support this in the sense because it is a report, requesting a report to go to the annual plan. I am quite wary about some of the issues that are being discussed here. And when I start thinking of the number of $250,000 that's been talked about with options around investigating passenger rail, etc., I get really concerned. But at the same time, having quickly scanned what came out of the budget today, I see Kiwi Rail's got 1.2 billion. The fact being, though, is that we are going to have to tighten our belts at this annual plan time, and to try and say, where is this $250,000 or whatever the amount may be, really, really concerns me. There is a future for rail in this city. What that looks like, you know, maybe we'll get some answers from this report. Do I believe there's a future for commuter rail? Depends on how much money there's outside funding there is for it. But I will not support going down the road in the future meetings, ratepayer money being used to fund this. So I look forward to receiving the report and discussing it at annual plan time.
Councillor Lord.
Sorry, I'll take my hand down actually.
Right, that's fine. Any further speakers? Then we have Councillor O'Malley.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I thought my hand was up. The RMTU came to the annual plan at my request, answering a question I said, which is, could you do a back of an envelope calculation of what you think a 6-week trial would look like, given the rolling stock was now mothballed? And of course, they had to present somewhere, we had to consult on it somewhere for be able to consider it in the annual plan. So that was really the underlying reason that they were there. The position of commuter rail has to be put in the context of rail in general for the whole Otago Southern region. And when I have been championing this for a while, but it's part of a much, much, much bigger set of interrelated activities. Councillor Van der Vis pointed out that the Taieri Gorge Railway had an issue with underspent investment on its rail bed. Commuter rail itself would probably not be able to support the rail bed, but freight can. And so, in fact, the idea is that this was supposed to be leafed into a freight option that was supposed to come through first. I would not have been putting this idea forward, except for the fact that the Dunedin Railways has now mothballed its rolling stock. The idea really was that we were to get freight increases and improvements in the track and improvements in signalling, and that would pay for all of the heavy work that's going to be done on the rail lines, and then bring in some rolling stock to trial, putting the commuter trains in between the freight trains. There's current rail work going on down near the old Burnside freezing works, which will be able to put in what's called a running loop, which will be allowed to put commuter trains in between freight trains. The other thing about commuters is that you have to have a population density worthy of it. And that's the reason that I'm focusing on the southern end first, because there are 30,000 car movements every morning now going through the southern motorway. So we have started to hit the density levels we need to be talking about. I had a quick look at the New York Transit and did a simple calculation of the number of stations they have against the population of that city. And if you take that, you need around about one station for every 10 to 15,000 people in your city, which means we could accommodate around about 10 to 12 stations. So putting one in at Mosgiel and running it to the center of the city is definitely there's enough population to believe to serve it. In terms of addressing the start of journey and the end of journey, you put a park and ride in the Mosgiel station. So people from Outram and Mosgiel and any other outlying area can go and park their car there. They then arrive in downtown Dunedin, and then they are within walking distance if they are targeting the CBD. And we know from that traffic analysis of the 30,000 car movements that most of them, I think it's 75%, are targeting the CBD. So we already have some traffic analysis that supports this. The idea that we would do it now is only because the rolling stock is now being mothballed at the moment. I did not want to do this trial with the Tyree Gorge train because it's an old tourist train, and it's not really going to give us the momentum, the sense of what a commuter train would feel like, but it's here and it's an opportunity to do it. I think 6 weeks is a reasonable amount of time, although I think, again, it was just to get them to come to the public forum. There's a lot of design between here and now and running it that would have to get into place. And we do have to do a proper costing. But if we don't take advantage of this, then we're pushing this back down through a series of processes that would require it to end up in the regional land transport plan. Then a trial will be done, and then it would have to end up in the regional land transport plan again to go to the next step. It could take 3 to 6 years to do what we could do in the next few months. And that's one of the reasons I want to push this forward now. To the extent of will it not work? If it is, as Councillor Houlihan pointed out, well advertised to the people of Mosgiel, and they are basically told, if you don't turn up and get on this train, there never ever will be a train again, and then they don't turn up and get on it, then it's been answered, hasn't it? But I have a feeling that when we offer, if we do some good work down near the Mosgiel train station to allow 300 or 400 cars to park there, which is more than capable, it's the same size as St Andrew Street gravel car park, and the people are told that if you get on this train and try it, and you show that you vote by getting on it, that we will then take it seriously, I think we'll get large numbers. And listen, if we don't get large numbers, that will be the last time you hear me speaking about commuter rail in Dunedin. Because it is about the evidence, but how are we ever going to get the evidence if we never try? So I welcome His Worship's motion, and it supplements a lot of the work that we've been doing up to now, and I just hope we can all work together, and I'm glad to hear that other councillors are wanting to get involved too, because I don't want this to be me. I want us all to be behind this, and I welcome anybody who wants to help. Thank you very much.
Councillor Ruddock.
Thank you. So yes, I'm behind it too, Councillor Melly. Thank you. You've covered all of the reasons why and some good justification for it very thoroughly. So thank you for that. There's never been a better time to attract government funding for such a thing as right now. So that's it. I'll keep it brief.
Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that I support the motion, and I want to thank colleagues for their passion in bringing this forward. It's very unusual for all the stars to align, but it has on this occasion. But there's just one small thing that I wanted to encourage of colleagues, and that was using the word hibernate rather than mothball, because I do think the word mothball sends the wrong message to the community. Hibernate suggests a temporary thing. So that's just a reflection that I had. Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us to the Mayor's right of reply.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to make the point that this motion is entirely consistent with the motion of council in the non-public part of the relevant meeting that effectively asked for options to be worked through in terms of the future of rail in the city and the maintenance of the asset. The question of when is probably apposite also. I wouldn't imagine obviously that this would happen tomorrow or even next week, insofar as this is only asking for a report to come to the deliberations meeting for the annual plan, which doesn't take effect until the 1st of July. There is a process to work through, obviously, should it go through all of those stages. So that's by way of dampening expectations, maybe that something is going to all of a sudden kick off from here. The idea of subsidy has been mentioned. Of course, it would be subsidised by a local government and hopefully central government, just like every other element of our transport network is heavily subsidised by local and central government. I don't see why this would be any different. The goal from an advocacy point of view, obviously, is to tip the scales as far in the central government response as we can on the way through that. I don't know how much it will cost. I don't know if Mr. Cairns and his cohorts back of the envelope figures are accurate or not, but there's only one way to find out, and that's to ask someone to look at that and bring back a report to our budget meeting looking at what the cost is. And I find it remarkable that anyone would vote against a request for getting information to bring to a budget meeting where we can weigh it up against all of the other competing priorities, regardless of whether we've indicated at this point a desire or a lack of desire to ever spend council money on it, which in itself is quite something. So again, thank you to colleagues for their support for this. I look forward to seeing the outcome of the work that we've requested and getting stuck into the longer term advocacy that will be required, I think, to get adequate funding through central government or government agencies to make this work, should the public's desire be translated into a willingness to use the service. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put that by division. So if Ms. Adamson or Ms. Lapham, could you do the honours for us, please? Those in favour? No, I mean, sorry, I'll leave it to you.
Councillor Barker.
Aye.
Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Mayor Hawkins.
Aye.
Councillor Houlihan.
Sorry, my thing's playing out. Aye.
Councillor Fiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
No.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Radix.
Aye.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
He's making negative signs. It's a no.
Councillor Walker.
Aye. I may.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Hello.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Motion carried. 13-2. Is that right?
Thank you. That takes us to item 9, items for consideration for the chair. Anyone have anything?
We're on.
Councillor Wiley?
Thank you. Just regards to today's budget, it's not considerations for the next meeting, but for the today's budget, has there anybody got an update on what Dunedin funding may be coming to Dunedin for any projects?
I've no idea, but it's not business of this meeting at this point, and we can find out when we watch the news tonight, and staff will tell us in due course. I'm sure it'll be huge amounts, like the incredible spend that we've already seen from the government for this city. In fact, you know, there's a cheque on the wall, councillor, that was for Toitu, for the Chinese garden. There being none, short of giving you a message from the sponsor that a new link for tomorrow's meeting will be forwarded later this evening. It will not be the same as this one. I move that we adjourn this meeting until 9 a.m. on the 15th of May for continuation of discussion with delayed item 6. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Elder. Those in favour, please say aye. Plenty of hands against no. See you in the morning. Have a nice evening. The live stream is finished. Good night, world.